Hello and good morning. Welcome to Time to Act, how lack of knowledge in the cultural sector creates barriers for disabled artists and audiences. We are incredibly grateful for your time this morning. My name is Ben Evans and I am one of your co-hosts today. Um, I am a white man in my mid-40s. I've got short brown hair, a slightly ginger beard, and today I'm wearing a brown suit. I self-define as disabled, and so you can't see the cane that that frequently accompanies me. Um, I have a digital background on which you can see the logo of our project, Europe Beyond Access. And it also has the logos of the key partners of the project, the British Council, Occidente Dance Festival, Pet Art, Camp Nagel, Skarnes Dance Theatre, Anasistegi, and Holland Dance Festival, the partnerships of Europe Beyond Access. It also has the logo of our funder, the Creative Europe Programme of the European Union, to whom we're hugely grateful. Caroline.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's a joy to be with you. My name is Caroline Bowditch, and I am a performance maker, choreographer, and also the CEO of Arts Access Victoria. And I am your other co-host. And today I am coming to you from the traditional lands of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations in Melbourne, Australia. I'm in my home office. I am a white woman now in my 50s. I have an asymmetric curly haircut, and today I'm wearing a hot pink top with red framed glasses.
Thanks, Caroline. I just wanted to start with some housekeeping. Normally at the bottom of your screen, you will see the CC button, closed captions, and that is where you can find English live captions of the event. But in the chat right now, in the chat will be pasted a separate link where you can see captions translated into other languages. So that is a link that was sent to you in your email, but also it's being posted into that chat right now, the link where those languages can be found. So please choose from all of the wonderful languages we have: Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, French, Spanish. It's an amazing group of attendees. We're excited to have you here. In the pre-recorded section later on, we will be sharing some pre-recorded material. Feel free to use the slider within the Zoom function to make that smaller if you would like to see our sign language interpreters, British Sign Language or International Sign. There is no spoken translation, but during the session, you will see appearing on the bottom of the page a globe, which is a translation globe. And this is only for 5 minutes at the end of the presentation, where a film will be shown in Italian with English subtitles. But if you would like to listen to it in English, you can do so there. But we'll let you know nearer the time when that comes up. You can see already that there is a Q&A, question and answer function, and that's where we would like you to ask questions of the research team that we will introduce in a moment. You can also see a chat function. The chat function is where we would like you to communicate if you have any technical needs or any questions. But just to let you know, Caroline and I will not be reading the chat. Our technical team will. So if you want to ask a question as part of the discussion, please use the Q&A function.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So today's event will run for 2 hours. For the first 30 minutes, coming up next, we're going to hear from the research team at On the Move, who are going to give us an overview and some highlights from the research. We've also invited 2 professionals from the cultural sector to join us in a research dialogue with the research team to help us to understand some of the key findings of the report. Then we'll be hearing from a panel in which disabled artists, arts advocates, and mainstream cultural managers share their personal response to the report. And this will be followed by a conversation with the head of Creative Europe at the European Commission. And then there is an opportunity for you to ask questions of the research team. So we strongly ask and encourage you to share your questions in the Q&A function throughout the session, today's session. And we'll finally end, as Ben suggested, with a provocation, a film from the Italian Disabled Artists Association, Aldiqua. So please send your questions as they come up to the through the Q&A function.
Thanks, Caroline. And so we're going to make a start. I'm going to invite Jordi Balta from On the Move to turn his camera on and to join us for the first session of this meeting, in which he'll be introducing the Time to Act report. Jordi, if I could invite you to give a short description of yourself and introduce us to the Time to Act report.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm talking to you from Barcelona. I'm a white man, dark grayish hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a purple turtleneck sweater today. And I'll be presenting some of the main findings of the final report of Time to Act, which we are presenting today. And Johan Floch and Marilla Soert, who have also been part of the research team, will be joining us later for the question and answer segment of the session. Time to Act examines the importance of knowledge, experience, and solutions as a way to make the performing arts more accessible and inclusive of disabled artists and audiences. This has been a report a year and a half in the making, which has examined the knowledge existing within performing arts organizations in Europe of the work done by disabled artists and which means of support can exist to foster the inclusion and recognition of work by disabled artists. Has also examined experiences in working with disabled artists and hosting disabled audiences. And finally, it has examined recommendations and solutions to improve the situations in this area. It is based on mainly 3 sources of information and analysis. Firstly, an analysis of existing literature in this field, a wide range of publications, guidance, toolkits, policy reports, etc. that exist in this field. The results of an online survey that was answered by professionals of different kinds in 35 countries. And finally, a set of interviews and conversations, and particularly in the last few months, we've presented the initial findings of the report to a number of national and international events, and there's been very enriching feedback of those presentations. And we've also developed a new round of interviews with professionals, companies, and organizations to refine the initial findings of the research. One of the main findings of Time to Act is the fact that there is limited knowledge of work by disabled artists among performing arts organizations in Europe. So over 50% of the respondents to the survey said that they had poor or very poor knowledge of work done by disabled artists, and only 16%, so that's 1 in 6 approximately, said that they had good or excellent knowledge of that work. When we move to the experience in supporting and presenting work by disabled artists, one important finding here is that the frequency with which organizations in the performing arts present work by disabled artists is very irregular. So 15% of venues, festivals, and similar organizations do not present any work by disabled artists, and another 53%, so more than a half, present less than one production per year. And only less than 6% present 4 or more productions involving disabled artists every year. What else do we know as regards the work or the presentation of work by disabled artists? One of the important findings here is that for many professionals in the sector, it is difficult to find reliable information sources, and this remains a critical aspect in the difficulties in making progress in this area. When professionals and organizations in the field need to find trusted sources of information, they mainly recur to disabled artists and professionals themselves, who become key sources of information, as well as peer arts organizations and specialized services. And what we also found is that there is a very important role played by European networks and European funded projects in order to balance out the asymmetries that exist across countries, because there's a few countries that have a relatively good level of information and knowledge in this area, but this is very unevenly spread across Europe. So the importance of European cooperation is very high. Another finding concerns the fact that 31% of arts organizations that we surveyed say that they do not look for new work by disabled artists. And we also found that almost half of the organizations say that they are not confident that their programs are accessible for disabled artists, and that remains a gap to be addressed. The situation is a bit better when it comes to accessibility for disabled audiences, but here there's also aspects to address. In general, measures enabling the accessibility of disabled audiences are adopted more frequently than in the case of disabled artists. So a majority of venues have toilets that are accessible with a wheelchair, and there's a number of other measures to enable accessibility for audiences that have been adopted. However, there is much progress still needed, particularly in areas like communication. We found that only 19% of the venues and festivals have an accessible website, and only 13% and 12% have accessible communication materials and accessible booking, respectively. And there's another gap as regards the training and awareness raising of staff, including front of house staff in performing arts venues. One important finding is also that a key driver for change, a thing that enables organizations to make progress, is when they have disabled people in their staff, or when they have allocated responsibilities to someone in their staff, or have an allocated budget for aspects related to disability and accessibility. And another finding of the research is that in general, it seems that often the perception of organizations is overconfident as regards the degree of accessibility they are enabling, because often the percentage of people that say they are confident about how accessible they are is higher than what the evidence of the measures adopted then shows. The research was conducted in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was one of the issues that we also examined. And there was a sense that the pandemic has brought about new risks and threats, firstly, because of the fact that people with disabilities feel particularly vulnerable, and that threatens their continued participation as audiences in performing arts events. Secondly, because initial evidence shows that in a context in which unemployment and economic difficulties in many cultural sectors has increased, a particular situation affects disabled artists that might be feeling a particularly strong impact in terms of their employability and employment opportunities. And finally, there is also a sense that in a context in which there are many needs and policy priorities, the needs and attention to people with disabilities might be particularly neglected, and any progress that had been made may be left behind, and there's a risk of going back in some of the progress made. The final section of the report focuses on solutions and recommendations and how progress can be made. And to summarize a much longer discussion, there's three main elements that come up. One is the importance of putting in place cultural policies that focus on accessibility and which look after the needs of people with disabilities. And that's based on the evidence that there's some countries where progress has been made, and that generally where there have been ambitious policies and measures in this area. Secondly, the importance of engaging with gatekeepers, and by that we mean the important role of curators, producers, and training institutions, and the particular importance of training institutions was raised in many of the interviews with it as gatekeepers and, let's say, agents that have a very critical role in fostering a more inclusive and diverse sector, and also the importance of making these gatekeepers more diverse themselves. And finally, the fact that there are a number of toolkits, guides, and other practical resources that can be very useful tools, but often these are not sufficiently known, or they only exist in some countries. And there is a particular demand from professionals in the sector to have more available guidance, focusing in particular on how to make artistic projects more accessible, how to foster the development of disabled audiences, and finally, how to make workplaces more accessible, diverse, and inclusive. There is an understanding that it is particularly arts funders and national ministries of culture that should take the lead in facilitating progress. But as you can see in this graphic, this is very much a shared responsibility. So there is also an understanding that specialist service providers, local and regional authorities, and national and European professional networks have a very important role to play in enabling progress. And I think I'll leave it here just to remind that the Time to Act report is now available on the Disability Arts International website, and that we will be happy to further discuss its findings in the coming minutes through the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordi, for that. And I'm sure people have lots of questions. And as Caroline mentioned later on, we will be posing the questions that you put in the Q&A box to the research team. And Caroline will be reading these now and preparing to ask them later on. However, to start this process, we have invited two senior representatives of the European cultural sector to ask the research team some questions. So I'm pleased to invite Johan Flock, one of the research team. Really good to see you, Johan. But also, if I could ask now for Julien Arab, the international advisor at the French Office for Contemporary Performing Arts Circulation, and Joe Verrant, the senior producer at the UK organisation Unlimited, to join us. Thank you so much. Julien, I'm going to ask you to turn to ask a couple of your questions first, after briefly describing yourself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ben, and hello, everyone. So I'm Julien Arab. I'm a woman in my mid-30s, white passing with asymmetric brown hair. And I'm in my home today because we're alternating between home and office. And I have a white background around me. I hope that's enough. And maybe I can go straight into the questions. First of all, thank you for this, and it was such a great read and such an interesting report to go through. And maybe one of the key elements is that it really shifts the responsibility of overcoming the obstacles faced by disabled artists and individuals to those who are in positions of power. And I'm also speaking from an organizational position myself. And too often this responsibility is put on the shoulders of the artists and professionals themselves. So now that we have identified this lack of knowledge and it is clearly named, I'm wondering, what is your sense of the willingness of organizations to learn? And I would maybe connect this directly to another to something that is mentioned in the report, which is overconfidence, of having the impression of already doing enough. And then connecting it to another complex observation, which is very often organizations with all the good intentions think that they are doing the right thing, when the approach and in practice, it actually goes against what activists or advocacy or disabled advocacy groups are pushing for. So here I'm wondering, like, what is your sense of the ability or willingness or humility of organizations to go through the process of learning and unlearning some of the ways that are in place?
Thanks, Julianne. Johan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Very interesting question. Just to briefly describe myself, I'm a white man in its mid-40s. I have dark hair and a short beard, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck sweater today. I'm seated in a very typical attic flat in Paris. You are putting the finger on something very important and interesting. I would say that everybody so far in the in the surveys, in the interviews, and all the discussions we had, have a strong willingness to do more. People don't usually think they are doing enough, and many respondents were humbly admitting not being knowledgeable enough during the entire research process and proposing to connect us with specialized organization because they were saying, I don't know enough, but it is very interesting what you're doing. So this lack of knowledge means also the lack of what gatekeepers, curators, artistic leaders know and don't know. And obviously they don't master generally a lot of the, the variety of disabilities. And what we observe is what comes first in mind of most people is the physical disability, as we all know. So the interviews and public discussions often was a moment of raising awareness, a key point to actually discuss about disability issues, and many realized they were not actually quite aware of what they could be doing. And what we observe also is there is a intersectionality or transversality, and many professionals are overwhelmed with priorities. We're living in a very particular time in our society where there are a lot of urgent issues for them to deal with. But in terms of how to say that, in terms of unlearning, I think this is a very interesting term that you are using. We always see that the best advice in this unlearning process is to involve disabled people themselves and for them to lead the change. And this is what we call the nothing about us without us principle. In many venues and festivals, mostly from the independent scene in the Western, Northern Europe, but also in South Europe, more developments are observed when in-house personnel or personnel with a lived experience are in charge of leading the change in the organizations. It feels that the gatekeepers have a very important role to play in this. But to give you the scope or an idea of this massive cultural change that we need to operate, many non-disabled artists also are not always willing to adapt their work for disabled audiences, for example. So we see that this unlearning process not only goes towards, the gatekeepers, the curators, the people in charge or in power in venues and festivals, but really have to reach out everybody in our ecosystem.
Thanks, Johan. And I think that answer that you've given actually links with a question that Joe, I know you were very interested in. So I wonder if I can hand over to you to follow that up.
Well, I mean, I'm very interested. It was fascinating to read it, but deeply shocking. Sorry, my name is Jo Verrant. I'm senior producer for Unlimited in the UK. I'm a 50 plus, which means I am senior in the older sense of the word, been around the block. I've got purple hair. I'm in bed at the moment, not having a good health day, and I'm wearing a t-shirt that says vulnerable, still valuable. I've got a question that is about programming, really, just in terms of the volume of work that that people are putting out, because people said whether they were programming or not. I just wonder whether you got a sense of who is programming what at what level. It's like, are we seeing small companies and solo performances, or is it extending into main stage work? And I'm really curious about what you would have liked to have found. We always say in the UK that if disabled people make up 22% of our population, where and what figure should that result in programming? We certainly aren't 22% of what's programmed here. Yes, I'm really curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an interesting question also, because if I go immediately to the facts and figures of the percentages, we see it is a very difficult approach to adopt percentages, or let's say quotas, as a solution that was often mentioned by the interviewees we had. Because sometimes it looks like a very decontextualized approach. In many contexts, the number of disabled artists is very low, as you know, and sometimes there are no professional disabled artists. And in interviews, many people pointed out the necessity to make arts education and training more accessible, including all the long life learning, education, masterclass, seminars, etc. Of course, arts education was not part of the focus of this research, but it came so often in conversation, also to complain about the low number of disability-led arts projects in most European countries. So we have also here a lot of gaps between, the different European context. Just to give you an example that we put in our final report, in an interview with the Theatre Academy in Poland, the lead drama teacher was saying that in all his career, every time they open applications, they receive 1,000 applicants for only 20 seats. And during his entire career, he never saw a young disabled person applying to the drama school, which means that there is also, in this cultural change that we were talking about, there's also a lot of work to be done to not only make these institutions and art education program accessible, but also there is a perception or prejudice that we need to work on in terms of what kind of career a disabled young person can embrace. And there are a million reasons why probably they don't, in terms of lack of exposure to artistic work, the ability to actually make a living, and the risk of losing sometimes governmental allowance was put on the table quite often. So in terms of challenges, we have a lot to do also in terms of redefining what is artistic virtuosity, versatility, etc. But in terms of all the names that came, we see a lot of the usual suspects, I would say, in the artistic company, many of them based in the UK, that are identified and visible. And there we see also that some British-based companies were very successful in being able to, build relationship with many European venues and festivals. So yeah, it's good.
I think that's a really good point to bring in Julianne, who had a question specifically about geography and geographic imbalance.
Yeah, I had exactly this question that relates to context. And just to give a little bit of background as to where it comes from, we are at ONDA together with a number of partners at the end of the Reshape project, which is a European project, a research and development project that questions and tries to propose solutions for several challenges within the cultural sector. And this question of context, whenever we are talking about overall European recommendations, comes back onto play, and it becomes really important to find ways of formulating recommendations that don't stem from only one geography or only one context. And the report actually acknowledges the challenges that you as researchers faced with regard to geographic diversity and interlocutors and also sizes of organizations. So I'm wondering how this aspect is taken into consideration previously, like throughout during the research, but also in the future phases.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is the idea that there are a lot of gaps, like Jordi was reminding us, in existing literature, guidance, documentation, access to information, etc. During this research process, we took all the recommendations from the field and the solutions that are already suggested in many contexts, and reinforced them by giving feedback on these solutions proposed, and to have them dialogue with the data that we collected. Of course, it is a European study, so the purpose is to tap into this European relevance, the European competencies, and to address the responsibilities from the field itself. But for example, at European level, it could be interesting to have EU institutions facilitating exchange of good practices and fostering peer learning, because there are many guides and examples of progress that could be inspiring, which can then be adapted to local context. In the feedback and interviews, we always try to counterbalance the gaps in terms of geographical coverage. And we could, reach out to many professionals in Romania, Serbia, Poland, etc., etc. And we tried also to reach out to organizations from the so-called independent field, but also a more institutional field, the state theaters and state companies, also to highlight some of the elements that we were talking about in terms of education, visibility, how do you hire talents, etc. So instead of being inspired by one model, we were trying to propose processes that can be adopted or contextualized beyond a right-based approach that is always very valuable and that has potentially a lot of positive impacts in all countries.
Thank you for that question and that answer. I think we've got time to squeeze in one more short question from Joe and a short answer from you, Johan, if possible.
Well, I'd love to ask about the reasons for inaction, particularly what you picked up around a lack of funding. I'm really interested because we often hear a lack of funding being an issue. Is it a lack of funding? Or I often wonder whether it's people not prioritizing funding that they already have. We're talking about art in the arts sector. Many organizations have artistic budgets. Might it just be about spreading their budget so that it includes disabled artists. Do you think, from the people that you spoke, that the only solution is more money, or are there more inventive ways to look at finance?
I mean, it's a very good question, because money comes very often in the conversation, and as you saw in the report, venues and festivals are considering the lack of funding as a real obstacle to do more, both towards engaging more with the artist and engaging more with disabled audiences. So when it comes to supporting disabled artists, there is an awareness that production and distribution means have to be increased to cover specific measures that go from mobility to longer production processes, extra assistance, and sometimes also very practical physical access to the workspace that doesn't always exist. And this idea of challenging the way, the normative way of producing stage work implies extra cost. And for disabled audiences, I have to say that we observed in many countries that the accessible marketing material, accessible booking system, easy reading, accessible website, etc., employing extra team or training existing team members in communication marketing have a cost. One of the costs that is very often mentioned, just to give you an example, is the investment needed for the sign language translation and the workload behind the scenes to make it happen. So money is an issue, but of course, you're right in pointing out that it is an easy, a trick sometimes used to say we can't do it because we don't have the money. I would say that some of these steps, accessible measures, could be adopted by organizations at their own initiative, and indeed there are good practices in this respect. The report also stresses that governments across Europe have different approaches as regards disability, and there were more ambitious and inclusive policies. The more the policies are ambitious, the more funding is available, to put it this way. So ideally, it's a combination of the two, a combination of arts organization being proactive and deciding it is a priority, but also the policy and funding system supporting the progress.
Oh, this is where I feel we need a good hour on this, especially because I would have to share a personal experience of hearing one of the intendants at a major German theatre explain that he would only consider extra access if given more money. And I did think you are one of the most well-funded organizations in the world, and you're just choosing not to make this work accessible. It's a choice, it's an active choice. But maybe I've just slipped out of moderator role and into giving opinion. That's my prerogative. I'm going to say thank you to all of you. Johan, we'll be meeting you again later on with a Q&A with others, and I want to thank Julianne and Joe, and you can disappear now. A little housekeeping update. A reminder that please post questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat. Our technical team will respond to chat, but we, Caroline and I, will look at the Q&A. And also you will find, I'll ask my colleague now to repost the stream text link if you would like translated captions. I know some people arrived a little late and maybe didn't hear that announcement. So you can find that in the chat now. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Ben. And I'm with you on, we could spend a day having these conversations. Earlier in the week, I recorded a conversation with a number of disabled and non-disabled artists and arts professionals. These included Philip Pawlak, artist, producer, activist from Poland, Sonia Parmentier, from artist, teacher and activist from the Netherlands, Maria Vlachu, CEO of Acesso Cultura, Portugal, Tanya Mangalanagam, who's the project manager of Dialogue program at Skånes Dance Theatre in Sweden, and Claudio Gaetani, who's an actor, filmmaker, and founder member of Aldequa Artists in Italy, and also the director of the film that we'll see at the end of today. I asked each of the panelists to share with me their reflections on the report, what surprised them, what it confirmed for them, and finally, what they would want others to take from it. Here is a 30-minute excerpt from our conversation. So, Sonia, could you please give us your response to the report and describe yourself for us?
First of all, I'm a white female, 53 years old, with long brownish hair, and nowadays some grey coming through, I have to say. Today I'm wearing a blue, greenish jumper and purple glasses. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for allowing me to be part of the presentation of a report I think was and still is very needed in trying to build evidence and give arguments why it's really time to act. Nothing about us without us. That's the motto from the UN Convention. And I was really happy to read in the report, in the solutions part, that it is an important way towards more inclusion. And it says in the report, and I quote, "The involvement of disabled people is therefore absolutely necessary to create interesting offers to disabled people that they can trust." After reading the report, I asked the team about the number of responses from the Netherlands, and there are only 7. To be honest, I was not really surprised, but I was very disappointed. And it made me think if this is reflecting the lack of knowledge or lack of interest, or maybe a completely different reason. Unfortunately, there's another fact which is really not helping in the overall feeling about inclusion in the Netherlands. It's the fact that, like in most countries of Europe, like UK, Germany, Portugal, the UN Convention was signed in 2007 and ratified in 2008 or 2009. In the Netherlands, it took till 2016 till it was ratified. And even until now, the optional protocol isn't ratified. And this optional protocol enables an individual to get their rights at the UN Committee in Geneva when you're not able to get it under your national law. So, so much for equal rights. The other thing that resonated with me in the report was the part about the overconfidence. And I quote again, "Therefore, maybe some overconfidence not backed by evidence on the actual improvements in accessibility for both artists and audiences." And again, when I look in the Netherlands, then I have to say, yes, where there are some more inclusive performances on stage. Yes, there is more attention paid to disabled art, and an agenda and a code have been written. But something on paper doesn't mean that it's done or actually working. And yes, there are some wonderful individual initiatives. However, this will not bring about enough structural changes as long as we don't support artists in their education and in giving them perspective, basically giving them the tools and the opportunities to develop, but also allow them time and not too quickly play the quality card and use that as an excuse to not program Dutch disabled artists. The other day I made a comparison to the Paralympic Games, and the Paralympic Games, that's where a worldwide podium has been helping disabled people to develop in their sports and giving them some real perspective and challenges. It does raise the question for me, why can't we do that for the arts? And from an audience point of view, for example, in the UK and in Germany, the Paralympic Games were showed on television more than several hours a day. In the Netherlands, we had exactly 5 minutes after the main news and 30 minutes at 10 o'clock in the evening, although the level of performance was very high. I have to say, as Dutchies, we're very good in talking and meetings, but unfortunately, disabled people are not asked to the table very often. And I do experience that myself. And I find way too often I get a phone call after things went wrong or asking me how to solve a problem instead of getting in touch with me up front or with somebody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be me, of course. But believe me, that saves a lot of stress, time, and money. The whole pandemic situation has not made it any easier, I have to say, and I'm scared it will only have made it worse. On the other hand, there are also good things, for example, being able today to attend this meeting and launch in a digital way. And I really hope that we're not going to lose that, because I hope that this report and the disabled artists and their art and knowledge will be taken more serious. Because without them, I think we're missing out on a unique and maybe much required perspective on the world out there. Those were my reflections.
Thank you, Sonia. That's there's so much food for thought in that. It's brilliant. I'm going to next invite Philip to share your reflections on the report. Philip, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. And at the beginning, I am a young man with a beard and red hair. There is a large window behind my back, and I am sitting in an office, and I'm dressed in the black clothes with big headphones on my head. Yeah, also that reading all the report was something really helpful for me, because it's collecting all the knowledge and all the discussions that we had made in the last few months or years about the sector of arts and disabilities in Europe. Also, we had a lack of data and documents that we can, send to the decision makers in theaters that I'm working with. And here we have the big report. And my main job right now is being a theater producer in Poland in the mainstream theater. And that was the point of view that I was reading the report mainly. So I focused on that parts about decisions and about why decision makers and curators are not inviting the performances of artists with disabilities. One of the reasons that I read was about finances. And I think I cannot agree with that, because I read that they will invite performances if they will have extra money for that or extra accessible budget. And I think it's all about decision. Like you can choose to invite the performance of creators or performers with disabilities, but you maybe have to choose to delete another one from your program just to choose it. Maybe it's more expensive, but it's always about your decision. Always we could have more money to have a big program with all the groups that we want to invite to our theater or to produce something. But if we are talking that we will be accessible if we will have extra money, that will never stop. It's just about decisions and about having another perspective. That is, I was really happy when I found that positive content in the report about things that artists with disabilities are bringing to the art sector. That is something really incredible and really something passionate. That is something great that could broad the program of institutions. Also, I think it's really due to the market and to the overproduction of the institutions that I'm working in. I'm thinking about my perspective, that we want to sell a lot And the waste production with artists with disabilities really often needs another time, another support, and another just another needs that really institutions have to change their standard weights of production, and it's not economically good for those institutions. But it's not always be. It's just we are working in the idea sector, in dreams and in really beautiful things. It's not only thing about it's not everything about the market and the economic stuff. Also, in my head, it's connected with things that I don't found enough in the report, and I think it's really important. So the lack of higher education for the artists with disabilities, I think it's really important to still talking about that, because one of the arguments and the reasons when I'm talking with the curators or producer that they are not inviting artists with disabilities is because they don't have higher education in art, because there is not a program for learning the artists with disabilities, and you know, it's this closed circle. Just we are still having the same conversations. I think the one of the solutions is really starting to creating the European system, or some Erasmus project, maybe something to create the higher education designed also for, not separately for the people with disabilities, but to include them for the standard ones, to work in art academies, but also in management academies, in with art managers, to have that topic also in art academies.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip. I'm going to next invite Maria to share your reflections on the report.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you all for the invitation to be here today and share our thoughts. I'm a white woman in her 50s, short light brown hair, green eyes, and I'm wearing black as well. The report confirms many of the things we already know, but that's really great, because many times we feel we need to have proof of what we're saying, and now we've got it. Of course, people working in the culture sector express a lack of knowledge around issues related to disabled artists or disabled audiences. I have to say that in our particular case, in Portugal, we feel that we have more and more colleagues, people working in the cultural sector, who are aware of the issues and even of some of the solutions and the way forward. But then their directors, the people who make the decisions, they don't come to those capacity building sessions we're promoting. So many colleagues actually say that the first barrier is an internal barrier, when the persons taking the decisions are not on the same, you know, they don't share the knowledge, and they don't share the views and the priorities. Then I would like to stress one of the things Philip brought up, that because these things are related, the fact that those people teaching in artistic schools also have a lack of knowledge around disability arts, both in what's happening nationally in Portugal and internationally. So disabled people who are interested and are getting in touch with universities because they want to become actors or dancers, whatever, musicians, they get a no for an answer. And sometimes the justification for that no is truly unacceptable and shows lots of ignorance. A surprise for us from this report was that disabled people are eager to attend performances. Of course, there are people eager to attend performances, but they are very few from our experience in Portugal. So what we are registering now is a growing offer of performances which are accessible, but the audience is not growing. And why is it not growing? Maybe not growing as fast as some people would expect. And we need to be clear and realistic about that. The arts and performances were not part of many people's lives so far because they were not accessible. So it will take time to build this relationship of trust. So yes, we have people who are eager, and we have many more who don't even know about the cultural offer and how accessible it is. A final point I would like to make relates to the fact that the majority of respondents expect the ministries of culture or funding bodies to take the lead in this. I'm not going to contradict this. I just say that this is not the only way, perhaps. In our case in Portugal, it was the sector that got organized and created an association. It was the sector who reflected intensely around these issues, who promoted capacity building sessions, who came up with ideas and possible ways forward. And then we built a rather good relationship with the Ministry of Culture and with the Arts Council Portugal. So there's not only one way of doing it. Perhaps it's us that could start the process. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay.
So, Claudio, could you please give us your response to the report?
Okay, thank you. I'm Claudio. I'm an actor, a director, and an educator. I am 45 with black and white hair, salt and pepper, black shirt, and I am in a very ugly and naked room. It's an Airbnb room, so there is really nothing special around me. I agree quite a lot with the report, and what I think it is a bit like the dog chasing his tail, because I feel we are in the center of this revolution. We are in the middle, and so what it is important are especially two things for me. First, to because I agree completely in giving full access to people for school, art school, etc., etc. But this thing, of course, may involve also the other environments for people with disability. Because what if a person just doesn't want to be an artist or something else? And this is it is quite important what we are doing here now. That just doesn't involve only arts, but everything first. Secondly, what Philip was saying about higher education, etc., it is something that concerns the whole education life of a person. And this means that we should start considering the fact that a person with disability is not like is lived sometimes in schools a load or something strange or whatever, but it is a point of view that should be questioned and investigated, should be known. And from this point of view, we can understand what could be the direction of that person, okay, in life, in future, in dreams, in aims, and everything. But also for this, one very basic thing for me is to also to remodel the imaginary connected to disabled people, because it should be quite clear what I just said, that a person is always a point of view. Here we are on this earth, we are 7 billions of different point of view. So a person with the disability is a story, a different story to be told, so, and to be known. So it's not just that a little person or a down person or a person on a wheelchair is just that, as cinema or the habilistic word say and tell. But you should really question that point of view, should really understand how a person really is and tell the truth. And that for me is one of the main focus that should be considered, to also to discuss with the cultural industry how we tell this word.
I'm next going to invite Tanya to share your reflections. Tanya, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. I work as a project manager at Skånes Dansteater in Sweden, Malmö. For physical description, I am a woman in my mid-40s. I've got grey hair and I am of Swedish Sri Lankan origin. I'm in my home in front of a bookcase. So for me, reading the report, I echo a lot of things that's already been said, but it was particularly what you said, Maria. It's really about confirming many of our own experiences and our journey in, I guess, becoming one of the leading voices in Sweden within dance and disability. Mainly our work as a dance company has focused on producing, commissioning and presenting dance performances with disabled and non-disabled dancers on our main stage in Malmö, but also festivals around Sweden and abroad. But another important aspect of our work has been to develop platforms and opportunities for local disabled dancers to develop their own artistic practice. Because again, I echo some of the things that both Philip and Maria and Sonia said, that there is a lack of access to education. And for many emerging disabled dancers, this platform has been the way into being employed as dancers, both within our own company, our own dance company, which is a mainstream repertory dance company, but also others have gone on to work with other leading cultural organizations in Sweden. So just to say that we are a company of 20 dancers who work in the company. We are a small company of 45 staff, apparently, and approximately, and 20 are dancers. And we really began our work towards a more inclusive dance sector in 2011. And then we, just to give a bit of background to the responses to the report, we then began to ask the questions on why there were never any disabled audience members coming into the theatre. So very much echoing what you were saying, Maria. And in finding the answer to that question, we began a dialogue with the disabled community. And it very soon became clear that the disabled community were not interested in becoming audience members for an art form that they felt excluded from. So very early on, the driving question instead became who gets access to the stage and who belongs to the stage. And this question prompted us then to begin presenting performances by inclusive dance companies. Many of these were international, to really present strong representations of disabled dancers on stage. And we also understood that in order to instigate change within our own organization and providing role models for the disabled community, it was essential to employ disabled staff. So we started to work intensively over an initial 3-year period together with Caroline Brodich, who's here, employing her as an artistic strategic consultant. So really working with us to get more disabled people involved in dance, working with us to develop strategies in how we could become accessible for the disabled community, both as artists and as audiences, but also working with us in making work performances with emerging disabled dancers. Parallel to our work with Caroline, we also recruited professional disabled dancers to join the dance company. So I just wanted to give you this background in the beginning of our journey in order to be able to emphasize some of the key points that the report gives evidence to being drivers for change. So the report clearly states that it's essential to involve disabled people in decision making. And I believe that that's one of the key factors of our work at Skånestadstheater, is that it's the response from the disabled community that informed and continues to inform how we work. And the report also states from the experience sector side that for most arts organizations working with arts and disability, in most cases tend to focus on audiences first, artists later. But for us as an arts organization, it was the opposite, really focusing on artists and artistic development first and the audience later. And in our case, employing disabled dancers within the dance company has really led us to produce high quality dance performances presented on our main stage. And in fact, one of these performances, a duet called Det Rec, has toured extensively, both nationally and internationally in main stages in Europe, but also places outside Europe, such as New York, Canada, Korea. And it's up to date, actually, the most toured work that Skånestadstheater has ever produced. So I just also want to say that I do believe that access for audiences is really important, equally important, but I believe that producing performances of high artistic quality is what's going to change the sector, where disabled people are seen, and I quote the report, as active agents rather than as passive recipients of culture, is really key in making the work relevant for disabled audiences in the first place. The report also clearly states that employing disabled staff are drivers for change, and in our case at Skånestadstheater, this is clear. It is the disabled artistic staff, that's the dancers and artistic consultants, that have been the change makers within our organization. Another key factor that's mentioned in the report, which I strongly support, is how European networks and programs have contributed to fostering knowledge and good practice exchange. This is an experience that we share as a cultural organization, but perhaps more significantly, this is an opinion that is voiced clearly to us from the disabled artist community involved in the projects. So these projects are really extremely important for professional development opportunities based in Skåne, but they also offer a unique peer-to-peer learning for many disabled artists that we work with. Being part of a larger kind of European disabled artist community breaks the feeling of isolation. And for example, being the only disabled dancers within a mainstream dance company, it offers really unique opportunities to share lived experience with other disabled dancers that would be very hard today in another setting. And finally, there's a lot more to say, but I would like to say that I hear what you're saying, Maria and Philip, about not waiting around for structures and cultural policies, but I am very pleased that the report points strongly towards developing cultural policies addressing disability and access within the arts. Because I feel that in Sweden, it's my belief that in Sweden, we really need to start developing specific policies towards arts and disability with a dedicated budget that will support change in the cultural field. And I really feel that we need to put much stronger emphasis within a Swedish context, within the national cultural policies we have here, on funding schemes that supports disabled people as artists and not merely as audiences. I mean, I can say more about this, but I think the system, it's of course amazing when it's a sector driving for the change, but it also becomes a very vulnerable and fragile set up in a way, because it's, as an institution, the board of directors are constantly changing, the artistic directors are changing, and dedicated staff are changing. And I think that we need to be really, it's too fragile. We need stronger policies to be set in place.
There are so many things that are pinging in my head, that are ways that we could go with this conversation. And I'm also very conscious of time. So I'm going to ask you all one last question that I would like you to think about, which is, from this massive report, what would you like the mainstream arts sector or arts ministries or arts funders to take from this report? One thing that you would want people that aren't as wise or as experienced as any of you to take from this report? And I'm going to ask Maria, just because you are smiling at me. So
Just because I'm smiling, I guess it was because of that.
Something instantly popped into your head.
You know, it's like with any issue, the first step is to acknowledge there is an issue. So what I would like them to take from this report is the fact that their lack of knowledge creates barriers or supports barriers, and they need to do something about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maria. Sonia?
Just get us on that table and give us the chance to work with you, and don't keep talking about us. Just start talking with us and communicate. I think that for me, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you. Claudio, one thing that you would want other people reading this report to take from it?
Yes, it is important that we are asked how we want to be represented and what are our needs to fully achieve our goals.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tanya?
Yeah, difficult question. I mean, I think, there was also in the report a lack of actually seeing work, disabled-led artistic work. And I would also really encourage actually Arts Council and funders to really go out and see the work that's being disabled-led, because I think there is a lot of preconceived ideas about what that work might be about. And really reiterating that for us as our personal experience as a cultural organization, that really embracing diversity is what develops the art form, and in a very selfish way will allow us to survive as an art form, to be still relevant and have something to say about today's society. So that's, I guess, also it's about gaining knowledge about change for funders and Arts Council. That's the one thing.
Thank you, Tanya. And Philip, one thing.
Okay, maybe to sum up all the report, it's just stop making excuses. Everything is clear. Sources are given. You have all the knowledge to change the system, and we are just knocking the door to constantly from years to years, and it's really time for that. It's hard to find one, key point, key findings from the report to give us the most important. It's just there is a lot of excuses here, but also a lot of solutions that we don't have a knowledge, but we have a knowledge from artists with disabilities. So you have it or not. It's just maybe decide if you want to do it or not, because it's not about your wanting. It's about our need and about our need and our right. So just stop making excuses. Maybe yes.
Perfect. Thank you to all of the panelists that have shared their insights with me in this session. Yeah, it's been a joy to be sharing space with you. So thank you all for your time and your wisdom that you shared.
Oh, Caroline, I am so jealous of your conversation. Thank you to you and to all of those panelists. But I know that I also had a conversation this week that you were jealous of, and that is a conversation earlier this week with Barbara Gessler, the head of unit Creative Europe program of the European Union. So perhaps we can see that conversation now. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Before we start, I wonder if I could ask you to give a one-sentence visual description of yourself, please.
Yes, sure. Good morning. I'm Barbara Gessler. I'm a blonde, middle-aged woman, and I put on some very red lipstick this morning.
Thank you. We're going to jump straight to the questions. The report shows that European networks and transnational collaborations have been incredibly important to the development and sharing of knowledge of disabled artists and accessible cultural practices amongst arts managers. And I think the figures in the report show that European and international performing arts networks are mentioned by 32% of the respondents as their trusted sources when looking for information about disabled artists. And this compares with a much lower level for national performing arts networks. So the strength of the European and international field is clearly evident. So my first question is, in your capacity as the head of Creative Europe program at the European Union, how do you reflect on the report?
I find the report extremely rich and extremely inspiring and extremely revealing as well. It also shows the weaknesses that we are seeing currently, but also very, very encouraging that there's such a wish also and an awareness that the European level can actually do and support the development of the participation of disabled artists in the cultural and creative process at the European level. That I find that extremely stimulating and encouraging. And I think that will form the basis and can form the basis for us to be even more proactive and even, encouraging good practices more.
And so you think there might be a role for European institutions to support and encourage this?
Well, you know that the European Union has launched a disability strategy not so long ago. And therefore all services of the Commission are actually called to take into account special needs that people may have, not only when it comes to funding or culture, but also obviously other policies. So this is a cross-cutting issue for the entire Commission, therefore also for us, for our programs and all the funding programs that exist. So naturally, we are asked to take this into consideration. Now, that's only the financial part that the report also reflects upon, but I would go actually further. I would say that there's also, of course, in our political cooperation with member states, the national level, that is also, of course, highly reflected in the report. There's a role for European institutions to play also when it comes to raising awareness. And our projects, that's the other part of your question or of your introduction, Ben, is that we believe that via the networks and the partnerships that are being created, a lot of awareness can be raised. And we need to probably do more also when it comes to highlighting and showcasing those projects to a general audience or also to decision makers at local, regional or national level. And the report has definitely, as usual with your work, I must say, inspired me to think how we could do that, maybe also in a very condensed and targeted format. We could look into our instruments and say, who could we ask maybe to organize events where we look specifically at this topic and where we invite decision makers at other levels, etc. So it has definitely, the report has definitely laid the basis in me to look at what we could do better.
That's really great to hear, I have to say. I think one of the things that comes through very strongly from the report is the national asymmetries, that some countries are much further in the journey than others. And specifically, one of the challenges is that the report says that European arts managers want to see national institutions such as ministries of culture and national arts funders as the ideal sources of information to share best practice. But the report and statistics also show that currently they're not playing that role, and also that those organizations, the arts funders, report themselves a very strong lack of knowledge in this area. So we have this dichotomy, and I mean, you've perhaps already explained, but this I suppose many of us are wondering how we escape this dichotomy. How do we support cultural ministries, arts funders to increase their knowledge? And it sounds as though the European institutions can play a role in that.
Well, yes and no. Of course, you know, in the area of culture, maybe not everybody knows, we're working in an environment where what you are saying is the rule, basically meaning culture and creativity are mostly dealt with at other levels than the European level, because we're in an area of so-called subsidiarity. So there's not an obligatory role in that sense that the European institutions can necessarily play in the area of culture. But what we do is promote the exchange of information, promote the exchange of experience, make sure that, for example, via our program Creative Europe, that networks and partnerships are created that can then help each other also. So it's more of a bottom-up approach. But I agree that there could be more that could be done also to invite the other levels to share better and more targeted information. And I think we have to probably jointly reflect how this can be done. The European level, with its disability strategy, has already asked upon member states to be active to fight discrimination on the basis of disabilities, and rather also in the positive sense to stimulate the participation in all areas of all ways, walks of life for people with disabilities. So there's already an approach there, and I'm pretty sure that we can kind of link in, we are involved in this process, but link in further in the implementation of this strategy. I would like to say, Ben, that already in the new Creative Europe program, maybe not everybody is aware, but we have included, co-legislators have included a paragraph, an article, and that rules for the whole program, for all of our funding. And the article says that the program objectives shall be pursued in a way that encourages inclusion in particular. And one of the main articles there says, ensure that people with disabilities and others, of course, have access to the cultural and creative sectors, and that encourage their active participation in those sectors, both in the creative process and in audience development. And I can say, I think I don't flatter you too much, but it's also thanks to the work that you have been doing that this awareness was there, that we needed to really have a concrete article that would require all projects to also adhere to this stipulation in the program.
It was, I have to say, it was great to see that as especially that disabled artists and arts professionals were mentioned. I think we've exchanged before about many assumptions in the cultural field, that when we talk about disabled people's access to culture, we talk about audiences, but actually what felt incredibly exciting about reading that was that disabled artists and arts professionals were listed there. And we look on with anticipation and excitement to see how that makes itself manifest. The report clearly shows that some of the dedicated arts and disability projects supported by Creative Europe, and Europe Beyond Access, we are one of them, but many others are mentioned, such as Unlabel in Part, Tanya Laline, and I can't remember all of them, but they're mentioned in the report as good practice. And of course, one of the things we are very interested to see is whether major projects which are not specifically aimed at deaf and disabled artists are able and encouraged to welcome disabled people when they apply and they meet the criteria of application for those programs. So we look forward to, well, I hope that some of those changes you've made help cultural managers take that extra moment of reflection before they launch into their programs.
We are yet to see, of course, the results. You know, we have just officially launched the program. We're currently in the evaluation of the first cooperation projects. I was happy to see that among, you know, this is the biggest bulk of our support at the moment, that 17% of the proposals tick the priority of social inclusion. And there will be projects that will definitely deal with this. And we are also briefing, of course, our experts to look at this. So, but I want to say is that we maybe need to also see how it turns out in the first year, and then maybe also see what can be changed, adapted, or tightened, strengthened in the following calls. If there's things that we can do to learn from the first experiences, if this is already taken enough on board or not. It's at the moment, we're still in our first experience of the new program generation.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. And I know that the European Arts and Disability Cluster have made some suggestions about ways that the application process or the budget process could be improved to encourage all organizations to consider access costs. But we realized that this first step was an important one, especially as it covers the rules for the 8-year program. So a key moment, really. May I ask you a couple of questions about Creative Europe specifically then? And the report talks about the knowledge of arts managers, including the knowledge of policymakers and funders. And I wonder how you would characterize the knowledge levels within your own program and team. And do you think there are concrete steps that Creative Europe can take to improve your own knowledge levels here?
Well, I think the negotiations have already largely increased awareness of the program. You know, we've been discussing also, of course, the Commission makes a proposal, then, you know, the European Parliament and the member states legislate on this proposal. And during this negotiation, we had lots of exchange also on those topics, I must say, and can reveal to you that this has been a topic, and rightly so. So already through this process over the past two years, I think something has happened. In my team, obviously, we've been very much involved. My team has backed me very much, of course, in those negotiations. So there is awareness. We are asked, as I said before, also by the other services and the responsible services to contribute to what is called inter-service consultation when it comes to pieces of legislation or programs, etc. So also in the other colleagues are also more aware of this topic. And this is where I think also the top-down necessity exists. You know, we cannot just rely on projects coming up from the bottom saying this is what we want to do. We also need to encourage this, and we now have a concrete opportunity to do so via the program. And I will take away also from the report that probably more needs to be done also at our level, and will reflect on how concretely we could do that. Because you're absolutely right. It's also an awareness in the institutions that needs to exist. not only, and there I'm also very clear, and I'm happy about the article that we have in the program, not only about the challenges, but also about the opportunities. I would like to bring also this message a bit further, that we're not talking about a problematic area, but an area which is enriching and beautiful. So that's what I would like to work on also in the future years, based on the report.
Well, thank you in particular for that comment around top down. I think it's a theme of today's webinar, actually, that this knowledge and drive towards greater accessibility is only really successful when it comes from senior decision makers rather than delegated to a single member of the team lower down the organogram. And I think clearly you reflected that by being here yourself today. What a horrible experience to watch oneself on screen for 20 minutes. But I hope you found it as interesting and encouraging as I did, that Barbara Gessler there from the Creative Europe program was making commitments to develop and work more. And I've got some news, which is news since I had that conversation with Barbara, that today Barbara's team at the Creative Europe unit have formally presented the Time to Act report to the European Council's Cultural Affairs Committee. So that's the committee that prepares the work of EU ministers for culture in a wide range of areas related to EU cultural cooperation. So that feels like another small but exciting step. We're about to start the question and answer session, which Caroline will lead. And just to let you know that during that session, on your screen will appear 4 survey questions. These are helpful for us to evaluate our work and also to evaluate the diversity of our audience. It also includes information we need to report to our funder. So please, we'd be grateful if you would consider responding. And of course, your responses are anonymous. But I'll hand over to Caroline.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks for that amazing conversation. It's heartening and exciting to kind of see how that rolls out and what happens next. So now it's time for your questions, and we have received lots of questions. What I would like to say is that I'm going to focus on questions particularly related to the research, because we're going to be talking to the researchers that have prepared the report. So the team from On the Move. So I'd like to welcome back Geordie, Johan from On the Move, and I'd also like to welcome Marie Lesor, who is the director of On the Move and has overseen the research. So welcome back to the 3 of you. I'm just waiting for people to turn their cameras on and come back. Hi, Johan.
Hi.
Hi. So we have received several questions, well, many questions from people. And I am just going to start with, actually, I'm going to ask Marie if you can first begin by just giving us a visual description of yourself, Marie.
Yes, hello, good morning. So I am a white woman in my mid-40s and I have middle long brown hair and I am wearing a black top and I have a messy shelf behind me. I am working from home. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And thanks for being here to be part of this conversation and having presented with such a fantastic and rich report. I'm going to start with a question that we didn't quite get to answer before from Julien, which I wonder if you could speak about any elements or parts of the research which you decided not to include in the report, and why did they not make the cut? Or at least the parts it took much more discussion than others? How did you decide what went in and what didn't? Is the short answer question.
Marie, do you want to start or should I go?
I will just maybe say one thing, and after I give you the word, just to say that when you will see the full report, we commonly also decided with the British Council, so with Ben in particular, to not to put the name of specific people that were interviewed, because some people really wanted to remain anonymous, because you know, in the kind of critical feedback they could have on some question, for instance. So we did respect that. So that's why there is not a list, very precise list of the people that were interviewed, but they were very key, of course, particularly in the last process of the research. Johan?
Yes, in terms of topics that were not discussed much, but would need to, you know, would need to be investigated further. Of course, as we've seen, the access to art education. I mean, in the panel, in the study, it came very, very often in conversation, and access to vocational, but also informal education is something that was not part of our mandate to investigate in a way, but would deserve really to have a piece of research and probably a lot of conversation with art education stakeholders. A second topic that was not investigated and could be very interesting in the future is the media coverage or the visibility of disabled artists, not only in the mainstream press, but also in all the specialized press, the press or the media that are very useful for gatekeepers, artistic leaders, to investigate what's out there, to gather, collect information, to scout for talents and artistic projects. And this media coverage or visibility issue, as we have heard also, is pretty high in the agenda. Maybe something that is more niche, but somehow is also very interesting in terms of reaching out to disabled audiences and making the work available for them and accessible for them, is the perception by non-disabled artists themselves, and why they choose to not make their work accessible. And this is a topic that is, you know, a bit tricky to investigate probably, but in terms of raising the awareness, I mean, there is a point to make. And of course, in this research, we didn't look at, you know, artistic processes, artistic quality. And I know it is always a question that pops up, you know, in all the conversation. What is exactly high artistic quality? But I guess this is something that would need a way more focus on the aesthetics and the artistic research processes, etc., which was not really the focus of this particular research. I don't know if you want to add something, Georgie or Mary.
Johan, thank you for addressing the question of quality, because that was a question that had come up about how do we, it often is something that there is an assumption made about the work of deaf and disabled artists and its quality, I think a lot. So it's interesting that it came up. We've got a question from Hannah Quigley, which is about, given the timing of the report happening in the last 2 years, Hannah's aware that there's a lot of organisations where staff were on furlough or on reduced hours, or there were lots of changes in staffing structures. Connected to Sonia's point in the panel that I chaired, Hannah's wondering if the report has enough accurate and detailed data that will make it useful and meaningful country by country at this in what's already there. Does that make sense? Is there enough detailed and accurate information?
Yeah, I can answer this one if you want. I mean, the report has been conducted between 2020 and 2021, but it also builds on quite a lot of literature on this field that existed before. And it has examined also the trends and the evolution that have been visible in some countries, including very positive progress being done in some countries, which shows how when there is a mobilization by the sector, when there are policies, when there are specific measures adopted, progress can be made. And then it has also, of course, examined the reality at this particular point in time, which also serves to highlight how COVID has brought about a new set of challenges that will need to be addressed, which add up to those that were already existing. I think at the same time, as regards the representativeness of the findings, I mean, first, it's important to note that we did a survey that has a number of answers per each country, but then that is complemented with a number of interviews, with a number of conversations, some of them with individuals, others with networks. There's been a number of presentations at national and European-wide events, and then we've complement that with the literature. So I think there's quite a wealth and a diverse set of sources that have been used. But I think what's more important, as someone was saying in the previous conversations, is for this topic to be put onto the table. And then let's say for this somehow to raise awareness that no matter what the departing point is, this is an issue to be addressed at the society level, and that public authorities and other actors need to address this reality. And the best way to address that is to consult with local stakeholders, including people with disabilities in their particular country. And of course, then the situations, the challenges, the needs will be very different. And of course, we cannot provide recommendations that will be valid at each specific context, but there's a number of general recommendations that really should guide change across, and of course then adapt that to each particular situation. So this would be more or less my answer to that. And yeah, I'm not sure if someone else wants to add to this.
Great, thanks, Jordi. We have a question. I mean, there's lots of people kind of asking questions about kind of moments that you found or examples that you found. And some of them will obviously be in the report, but you've had to, in making the recommendations, had to not pinpoint one specific thing, but overall. But for you as researchers, there's a question that's come from Aidan Howard about given the systemic barriers that prevent equal participation in the workforce, and this is a long-term challenge, did you find any kind of outstanding examples in your research that others could follow? Are there models or paradigms that other people could employ to try in their organization that really stood out to you as you're researching?
I'm not sure I fully understand. If we are talking about supporting or engaging with disabled audiences, and also sometimes with engaging with disabled artists, we can see that some specialized organization like Acesso Cultura in Portugal and the wonderful Maria, but a similar organization or services made available in some cities, and I'm thinking, you know, in Genova or in France, you have specialized organization agencies that support accessibility in the arts, and they high level expertise, their commitment really makes a difference on the ground. I mean, you can see in these particular contexts that they have an immense added value to support a a change, a structural change, but also to provide a lot of guidance to stakeholders and to communication marketing teams, to artistic leaders, to local governments. So they are recognized, highly recognized and highly appreciated. So one element, I mean, one striking element was you could really see the difference among, you know, countries where you have these specialized organization and when you don't. So maybe this is one answer. And of course, after that, you have a different level of commitments, and many venues and festivals across Europe are working towards engaging with disabled audiences. So they have a know-how and they invest a lot in PR communication, relationship managers with different, you know, groups they want to target and engage with. It's less strong for engaging with artists, but you can see that the more they have staff with a lived experience or with disabilities, there is a strong commitment of the entire organization to take on board and to really adapt practices and take measures. So again, the involvement of people with disabilities, workers with disabilities, is very key in this development. And you can be on the same territory, in the same country, and have like a very, very good example and a very, very bad example. But this, the personnel really makes a difference.
Thanks.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, to complement that, I mean, I suppose there is also a sense that in some countries, like the UK, for instance, and in particular periods, there's been a kind of an ecosystem of public support, involvement and engagement from specialized organizations, and of course, resources that have contributed to change. And let's say it's probably that combination of different levels and different actors working together and reinforcing one another that is very important. One of the results of that is also the availability in some countries more than in others of an important number of toolkits, guides, and practical resources, as well as people that have the expertise to share. Because despite the differences across countries, there's some solutions. There's some solutions that are quite universal and that could be shared. There is potentially a potential for that expertise and those guides and those toolkits to be translated, to be made available, and somehow, let's say, for that knowledge that often exists in pockets to be more disseminated more broadly, and only that step could have a potential to generate a very substantial change.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jordi. Marie, I want to come to you with my last question, which links really nicely to what Johan was saying about, so On the Move has obviously been deeply involved in this research for some time. On behalf of British Council and Europe Beyond Access, do you think in doing this research, your organisation has changed? Do you think you've gained more knowledge because of this work, and that will have, I don't know, what will that be? What will the impact of that be going forward, if it has?
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this question. I think if the organization has changed, is maybe not to me particularly to say that, but more also like to people who follow us, particularly our website. So just in a nutshell, On the Move is a mobility information network. So our main mission is to provide information about mobility opportunities for artists and cultural professionals. What I can really share up to now is that, first of all, indeed, the process of this research has been longer than expected, with also because of the pandemic. But at the same time, it has brought also in the process, you know, other moment of interaction, and also like to get feedback, also like to feed very much this research. And So Jordi and Johan mentioned in particular, we had like different events together with the British Council, for instance, in different countries. And so much of the conversation happened, I would say, during this event, but also behind the scene. And so and we can see also in this very meeting that it's as if we have two conversations here, this conversation here, and we see also a network in the making, in the chat, with people wanting to, that would like also very much to stay in touch. What I can say at the level of On the Move is that we have gained, I mean, in a very humble way, I would say, but we have gained a more information, more resource to make some decision, for instance, in the way we make information more accessible through our report, for instance. We work also with a designer who is now working with a font, which is also Luciol font, which is more, for instance, accessible for in relation with visual impairment, also with some new feature as well on our website. So all this question of accessibility, and in terms of content of the information as well, we try, and it's a long-term process, of course, to identify more opportunities for artists and cultural professionals in situation of disability, and or to identify it sometime into mainstream type of course and opportunities, those criteria that can also comply very much with them. And a last point I would like also very much to say, and here it's even more long-term process, networks like ourselves are also like very much into advocacy. So the fact of doing this research help us as well to fine-tune our advocacy, I would say, argumentation in favor of mobility of artists and cultural professionals, which also embed more the particular situation of artists and cultural professionals with disability. So, of course, it's part of the process, and I think it's Tanya Erhardt who say in one of the first presentation of the Time to Act, because we had the initial finding first, and she's saying it's not a matter of ticking the box, but it's really a matter of a process, and I think we are there, and thanks also for this collaboration with the British Council and the EBA, Europe Beyond Access project.
Thank you so much to the On the Move team, to Jordi, to Johan, and to Melvin.
And yes, I'd like to echo your thanks, Caroline, to the whole team for this remarkable piece of work. Also to thank everyone who's taken part in today. We're just about to do one last thing in the last minutes of this webinar, but and that is to watch the video made by Claudia Gaetani, who you met earlier. But I should note that in the chat, as Marie mentioned, one of our attendees has posted a Google document in the very clever foresight that we as British Council cannot share your details with each other. We haven't got the right to share, but a Google Drive a Google document has been created if you would like to post your information there for you yourselves to share with each other and keep in touch. It's one of the sad things about not working face-to-face, although there are huge advantages. We're coming to the end. We're going to take 5 more minutes of your time, and I hope you will bear with us for 3 minutes over the allotted time. I think you'll want to. In the earlier panel discussion, we heard from Claudia Gaetani from the Independent Association of Disabled Artists in Italy called Aldiqua. Claudio has just directed a film made by Aldiqua, and we thought this would be the perfect moment at which to share it. This is where, if you would like to listen to an English sound recording of what's happening, we encourage you to go to the interpretation button and click on English. There will be nothing there in the Italian section, so just click on English. But otherwise, you can listen to it in Italian with English subtitles on screen, and as usual in the CC closed caption box. we will be ending with that film. So I would just like to say thank you to all of you from across the world for attending, and we hope to remain in touch with you, and we will inform you more about this report and the work of Europe Beyond Access. So without any more delay, we're going to hand over to the film.
Ciao, come stai? Noi stiamo bene oggi, perché abbiamo finalmente deciso di parlarti. E lo stiamo facendo da molto vicino. Lo stiamo facendo dall'al di qua.
Siamo artiste e lavorate dello spettacolo, accomunati dall'essere orgogliosamente portatrici di corpi disabilitati.
Non chiederti cosa sia la disabilità. È la domanda sbagliata. Chiediti invece cosa ci rende disabili.
E tu? Cosa ti rende disabile?
Non sono i nostri corpi il problema, non le nostre competenze fisiche, motorie, sensoriali, neurologiche, cognitive. Noi non possiamo più accettare che sotto un unico confortevole termine da sapore medico-scientifico vengano raccontati e appiattiti i nostri corpi, le nostre storie, le nostre mutevoli identità.
Non parliamo di disabilità, ma di esperienze disabilitanti, imposte da una società costruita sul modello di quell'unico essere umano, occidentale, maschio, bianco, abile, sano, cis, etero.
Parliamo di quella società che ha creato una scala di valutazione delle abilità, selezionando i corpi e gli stili di vita che avevano diritto ad abitare il mondo, relegando gli altri a specifiche periferie. Per noi, ad esempio, sono state costruite delle riserve naturali dove ci viene detto potremmo stare bene.
E tu? Pensi che noi ci stiamo bene nelle vostre riserve naturali? Ci hai mai chiesto se vogliamo i progetti inclusivi?
Riuscite a capire la differenza tra dare spazi di autonomia e concedere spazi controllati?
Ci è stato detto che il nostro essere corpi marginalizzati è diverso dalle altre esperienze di minoranza.
Ci è stato insegnato a dire permesso, grazie, scusa. Ci è stato imposto di non pretendere.
Di noi da sempre discutono gli abili. E no, qui il maschile non è casuale.
Sui nostri corpi gli altri fanno esperimenti, creano visioni, scrivono narrazioni, traggono ispirazioni.
E tu sei sicuro che sarai abile per sempre? Siete sicure che le persone accanto a voi adesso siano tutte abili?
Siete sicuri di poter riconoscere una persona che subisce esperienze disabilitanti solamente guardandole in faccia?
Siete sicuri che una persona con disabilità nascosta si senta serena nello svelarsi? Perché?
Siete sicure che non subirebbe ritorsioni professionali?
Siete sicuri che quando sarete meno prestanti di adesso, e vi assicuro che accadrà, sarete pronti a rinunciare a lavorare?
Sareste pronti a delegare la vostra vita e le vostre ambizioni alle scelte di altri?
Se vi guardate intorno, quante persone con disabilità vedete in posizioni lavorative di direzione, decisione, potere?
Che differenza c'è tra far sentire una voce e appropriarsi di quella voce? Stella Young, drammaturga, giornalista e attivista australiana con disabilità, morta nel 2014, è stata la prima a dire I'm not your inspiration.
Noi ora lo ripetiamo.
Lo moltiplichiamo.
Lo amplifichiamo.
We are not your inspiration. Non siamo qui per voi, siamo qui per noi.
Per prendere lo spazio che non ci è mai stato concesso.
Per prendere parola.
Per creare un precedente a quelli che verranno dopo.
Per formarvi.
Per formarci.
Per smettere di essere eccezioni.
Siete sicure che vi aspettavate che ci fossimo anche noi?